we'll go ahead and get started here. We got a little smaller group today. So we've changed the agenda slightly. John Jackson last week was able to, 2 weeks ago, was able to get through all of the models very quickly. So we're pulling some of the topics forward. Today is going to be a little more tactical and practical, and how to basically set up a team, set up the governance, and even do some planning for a high level, I wouldn't say ML strategy, but just where to apply it in the organization. And then July 11th is going to be some new topics. It's about the agentic user experience, and our colleague David Blatherwick is going to be leading that one. So these are best practices around how the user experience is going to change from our traditional navigation. And then we'll close out in July with change management. This is about leading organizations forward and how to persuade the rest of the company, the board, all the way down to your individual stakeholders, how to change. And this is whether you want to modernize the architecture, whether you're doing a major acquisition, if you are splitting up a monolith. That's what the 25th is going to be. And then August 8th is domain-driven design, and we'll do an event storming exercise. And this is the exercise of splitting a monolith going forward. So, and we'll again provide all these slides and tools you're going to see today. So, all right, well, let's get started on ML maturity and adoption. So at a high level, it's good to just have a level of maturity stages within your company. So at the very far left, you're at the awareness stage. And so this is where the company's just starting to recognize the potential, but you really haven't really implemented. You've got a few champions, maybe a few experts in the company pushing for it, and just realizing you need to be in this stage. Exploration is what it sounds like. You've got some pilots, you're starting to upskill. The next stage is experimentation, when you actually are trying to find real world use cases. Then you move into implementation, then integration, where you've tied it into your operational processes. And lastly, you're innovating on this. So let's pause here and ask the audience just to show, where are you guys? And you can put this, if you don't mind, put it in the chat where you are. And if one of you don't mind sharing, because I think some of you are actually well down this path here. All right. Yeah, I thought
far
Christopher's
ranked.
on the far right. His business is founded on this.
Yep.
I expect that. And Christopher, did you start out on the far right? That was your business model, right?
Hey guys, we started out kind of like on the exploration experimentation and another business that I had or have, I still have it, but exploring that idea. And then when we realized that it was starting to get traction, that we started to like implement it into its own company. And now we're trying to constantly, innovate on it. So currently, so that's pretty much how it started. Like it was spawned out of another company where we were just doing stuff like exploring and experimenting with it. And then it kind of broke into its own product.
Very good. All right. We'll be happy to get your feedback after this session, because the idea is to help get people through these different stages. Sharma,
Same question to Sharma.
Yeah.
Sorry, Philip, you're right. I'm curious if I could read Sharma's update to everybody. We are in implementation, had machine learning implementation for some time, and now we're implementing artificial intelligence models. Can you deepen our understanding there, Sharma?
Sure. From a machine learning, so I'm in the consumer digital security space, right? So we have plenty of data and so on. So from machine learning part, like we would be looking at patterns and rules and that kind of stuff, right? So this been, machine learning in various forms has been, there for quite some time now. And now with the AI models and learning and so on, I think, it's getting to the next level where with the utilization of models, we can kind of enhance our, I guess, products, more so from like, identifying things and learning and adjusting more quickly than, how we were looking at patterns when we were doing machine learning.
Very good. All right. So just be aware of where you are. The idea that when you start experimenting and moving from awareness through these stages is to just take a measured approach, and we're going to provide more details later on. But the idea is to avoid the whole feature trap. You're really focused on outcomes and objectives. We talked about this during OKRs, but you're really looking for how can we improve some aspect of the business. So It isn't necessarily about the specific features, it's how the features apply to your objectives. And that's the approach that we're looking for. So we recommend an incremental approach. And there's some more details around this, but the idea of this incremental approach versus Big Bang, and we've talked about this in previous ones, is that you're mitigating risk and you're focusing on those very measurable objectives, and that keeps the team focused on how can we improve those outputs. And just like Agile, you get that regular user feedback. It also helps you scale up and down and fine tune and scale up the projects. A lot of folks have to start out with outside expertise. And if they scale up too quickly internally, sometimes those folks can get poached. We saw that quite a bit about 2 years ago when anyone that was piloting in this area was going to get poached in other areas. And now that's stabilized a bit that we're seeing. It also, as you can tell, it helps you adapt. There's so many changes from a tool perspective. It's a rapidly expanding market, so you want to avoid too many big bets picking a specific platform or vendor. But also the incremental approach helps you with cross-functional learning, which we'll explain a little bit later. But the idea is, how do we embed that within our engineering teams, but also from a product perspective, how do we expand that throughout the organization? And of course, that'll gives you flexibility, just like any part of Agile. You can course correct every quarter or every year. And it also helps you over engineer and, as we said, invest too much, not just on a licensing for the technology or compute, but also just wasting time from an engineering perspective. So that's where we generally recommend an incremental approach, because it is so new and it's moving so quickly. And conversely, when you focus just on features versus the incremental approach, if you just focus on features, you might miss that input of getting the feedback from users, whether inside or outside the company. It increases the risks. It reduces your ability to pick up those new technologies. You can also, if you just focus on deadlines, like we're going to focus on this by this date, you're more likely to increase employee burnout, which means they're going to want to take some time off. If you're really focused on, we have to get this done by a certain date. And of course, like any project that's date driven or specifically feature driven, it's similar with waterfall. You most likely have to trade off quality if you're not trading off on time. And it just increases complexity if you're not focused on that incremental approach. So that's one thing that you may have to explain to your team, but more likely to your outside stakeholders, how to focus on, the disadvantages of just focusing on, we need specific features. Again, it's more focused on incremental approach to outcomes. So the general approach is just defining a problem space. And at the end of this session, we'll talk about how to hunt for opportunities within the company, but really focusing on how to collect the data. That's a big part of determining what you can do and what you can't do. And then determining the model. You'll need to evaluate from simple to complex, as John explained last week. Sometimes the most simple approach is better than the more expensive ones that are much more costly. Come up with your MVP, generally add those features, and of course, plan for the system, particularly how you're going to change the user interface. And we'll talk about that in July 11th around some drastic changes to the interface that you're going to see with more of an agentic experience. Focus on performance, not just on the accuracy and the relevance, but also focused on the pipelines, the speed of the pipelines, and how fast you can rebuild your models and how often you do that in any kind of drift you see. You'll obviously have to collaborate, because the team focusing on this is going to generally be way ahead of the rest of the company. Those that are even experts are going to be dealing with novices and folks that are still very new to this. You'll have to deal with ethics and bias, and we'll talk about this. And then your model deployment, you will need operational aspects. It's ML ops, just like DevOps. As you do this at scale, you'll need to have this in general. So this is the general approach here. Let me pause there, and I'll actually call out the Christopher on the team there. How far along are you on all of these aspects today? Would you say you're nailing all of these today?
I will say yes, but I'm not going to say we're doing all of them well, if that's fair.
That's totally fine. Yeah.
That's a lot of work. It's a lot of aspects to cover, no doubt.
And it's interesting, if you don't mind me asking a
Yeah,
question.
go ahead.
So I'm all for the incremental approach, and I especially in the software, the software aspect of it. It's tricky though, that I find, because I have a team, like my team's comprised of, like, I have some software engineers right? I have, as we title them, NLP engineers. Our area of artificial intelligence is natural language processing. So I have there, and then like, some data engineers. So the NLP, it's a tricky Pete with the AI and ML development. It's a tricky process because not all of it necessarily is software related. So it's hard to fall into when you're actually doing model development. And even going back to the last time, sometimes you can't just necessarily use something off the shelf, or like, we're currently working on a new adaptation for one of our linking models where we link spans of social media text to medical ontologies. It's kind of how we take the lay terms, how people talk about their conditions, disease, and their conditions in their social media groups, and map it to more industry standards where our stakeholders can process that better and quantify it, and then that. But so we're on a new adaptation for that. So you're looking through papers, you're seeing kind of like where they go, or you're assessing different approaches you can take and weighting, like, what's going to cost more and stuff. But it's very hard to kind of be in an incremental approach where you're doing model development. So I know Gen AI is a big push here, but it still depends on some of these, like, as I forgot what your colleague's name was, talked about these supervised approaches, right? So it's kind of a combination of like
Yep.
you're
Mhm.
training and developing these supervised models, right? And then you can then use a kind of a agentic or Gen AI interface then to kind of get at the kind of more of the structured outputs that those models are creating. But it's hard. I struggle, sorry, this is a long-winded question, with this incremental approach with the NLP engineers, because some of these tasks just aren't really incremental. And like looking at the objective, like we're trying to, like, say one of our outcomes, or our, we call them objectives, not outcomes, right? I know you've heard of them. Like, we're looking for a new model in a certain time frame that's hitting a certain, standard of performance. But it's tricky though to try to get it broken down, especially when you're trying to get through the even just creating the training sets and stuff. So I guess we struggle in that aspect about it. I don't really know how to convey it, or I struggle because they just become longer lived features or tasks.
Yeah, let's stay on at the end of the session and we can talk about approaches there,
Yeah.
how to tackle that and break up that problem space. So let's, if you don't mind, we can stay on
Oh,
after the
not
scheduled
at all.
time.
I'm going to take up extra
No,
time.
that's a good,
This is the
it,
purpose of why we meet together. This is
yeah.
great. Chris, if I can, just
Sure.
a question. It sounds like you've got some distribution of AI or the concept of AI across your team. You don't have a specific team that's focused on AI apart from and distinct from your regular team. It's becoming embedded in everything that you're doing. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I'd say it's accurate. Like I said, we're not a huge company, so it's it's easy to kind of get that in there, and the premise of what we do is baked in there. So I purposely have everybody kind of working together, so they're all, even if they're not
Okay.
developing models, they're tied to it in some way
They're
to how we're using it. So
it's built into the fabric of the organization. That's the piece I was looking for.
oh yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So at least I'm trying to, or I think I am, but
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. Philip, back to
All
you.
right. You bet. Yeah, we can tackle that at the end and stay on a bit more. So as you move from awareness to experimentation to more operational implementation, you'll generally build out a team structure. And so we're going to talk about a fully formed team where you have all the skills necessary to be at the higher end of the maturity scale here. So in general, these are the example skills that you need. And again, not everybody can afford this because of the phases you go through. But the first, just like with Agile, you need a product owner. That's the one coming up for the outcomes and grooming the backlog. The Scrum Master, traditional Scrum Master, they're just the facilitator. They're looking to eliminate the any obstacles within the team. And this is typically someone on the team. It does not have to be the senior-most person on the team. It's someone that can just focus on, are we meeting our commitments every 2 weeks, every sprint, every iteration, and focused on the long-term things. So that's really what the Scrum Master is focused on, is keeping the team productive. Generally, you'll have a data scientist. A lot of times the scientist is the first person on the team and they're wearing all these hats when they experiment. As we walk through the data pipelines, the big data slides, we show the data scientist all the way from source to outcomes, typically, and that's where you typically see that role. And that person's a rare skill set in the company, so you have to move that person around quite often. Over time, you'll need an engineer. This is preparing all that infrastructure, working on the pipelines, making them highly scalable and performant. Then you'll have, if you can get an analyst, they'll help manage the data and look at some of the initial exploratory. They're taking load off of the data scientist as the models become more clear. And then there's an ML engineer, which is typically a subset or a different specialist than a pure just data engineer. They're focused on the models in production. And then lastly, if you can, a QA engineer, they're making sure the models are performing as expected. So this is a full-size team. This is a typical one that you would see. So let me pause here and I'll ask Christopher again, how many of these distinct roles do you have on the team? Or are you still small enough that you've got people wearing multiple hats in these roles?
Yeah, yeah. No, this pretty much lays out a lot of what we do. So I'm kind of handling the role of the product owner and Scrum Master for us. I'd say I have a data scientist who works on our deliverables right now are actually more hard copies, right? Using our infrastructure, using our AI internally, and then we turn that into like more like reports and stuff for our clients. Ironically,
Mhm.
that's how they prefer it anyway. I constantly test out theories for dashboards for them, and they're like, no, we'd rather have a PowerPoint or Word document or something. So my hypotheses are always clearly wrong. But they have data analysts that work on that piece, and then I have two data scientists that will, when they're doing the work, work on more bespoke models where it helps identify more of like what do we need to maybe create something more automated or not. And then we have the data engineers and ML engineers. I do not have a QA engineer. A lot of that just falls on myself or the data scientist kind of going as he's using the models when we get them to like a staging environment on some like, older projects to see how they're inferring and stuff. We'll do the QA engineer that way. But we don't have a dedicated QA engineer just because our size is it's not cost effective for us at this point, as you pointed out. So
Yeah.
pretty much we follow this suit, like that spectrum from if you're looking far right downstream data analysts. Um, another question we can talk to afterwards, I just want to plant the seed, is the term data scientist, right? Because a lot of times when we're hiring, if I put data scientist on the job title, it's like you kind of have I get a lot. I get people who apply to that role that fit any one of these not
Other roles?
or Scrum Master, but anything below Scrum Master, they kind of have a specialty in one of these areas. So it's interesting. So that's maybe another topic for conversation for later if you have time or something.
Yeah.
Good.
Well, this is one here. Maybe, or is this what you're typically looking for? We have these examples, and I will apologize. You'll get these slides, but what I'm apologizing for is the salary ranges are 2 years old. We've not updated these salary ranges here. But is this the background of what you're looking for and what you're looking for those folks?
Typically with the data scientists, we're looking more for like a little bit more downstream I actually just stay away from posting data scientist roles anymore
Mm-hmm.
because I'll get data engineers who apply to data scientist roles and I'll
Mm-hmm.
get like straight up ML engineers. Basically, like from my experience, posting a position that has the title data scientist in there, I'll get a range of maybe some people who are kind of like a Swiss Army knife and hit those areas, or
Mm-hmm.
people who are just specialties. And I get a lot of data engineers that will apply as data scientists. And I don't know if it's just because everyone's looking for work or not, but
That may be why. Yeah, and I assume you're looking more for someone with the math or statistics background. Is that what you're really looking for?
yeah, yeah, and they're pretty
Yeah.
much there, and more of that kind of like helping take, complex data and develop, like, and also playing that data analyst role for us. We'll put in there kind of like creating that narrative story from using our intelligence to create more of a story of the data that we're producing it from. So.
Very good. Well, for the rest of the folks here, there's some additional roles that we've added here as you become even more operationalized. You could have another DevOps engineer, just a traditional software engineer, a UI person, if it's really customer facing, and then perhaps a researcher. So for you, we've provided more details on these job descriptions, what the typical background is, to give you a sense of building these out. So you'll see all these slides here, more details, again, the data engineer, what they do, as we said, the data scientist, the data analyst, what they may do, the ML engineer, the DevOps engineer. And so those are the typical skill sets that you'll see. So as you're maturing this in the organization, and this is more of the model perhaps Sharma's in, or even Eric described, if where they're, even though they're in the awareness stage, there's different approaches to how you embed these skill sets in the team. So one way is you embed them deeply, or I'll show you a centralized model. So embedding them in the existing teams, one of the advantages there is you get that existing knowledge of the data. It's more efficient for that team. Recall from one of our earlier workshops, the small, durable, autonomous teams, they're not dependent on others, and so they're going to be more efficient and effective. And then because they're dedicated to the team, they can have those more incremental improvements. They should be more cost effective because you're putting someone on that team that's a full-time person. But the cons are you are stretching that person in that role or those individuals because they're probably the experts on some other part of that product team already that are dependent on other capabilities. You'll also find that those folks have to come up. They're still learning things that they don't have years of experience. And this actually may slow you down with that approach if you embed the folks in the team. The opposite one is we create a brand new team as kind of a siloed approach, just focus on innovation. And so their pros are they can just focus on the highest opportunity outcome. They're agile in their own way, assuming you staffed up those key skills that we described earlier, the scientist, the ML ops engineer, the analyst. You need at least 3 or 4 people typically focused as a dedicated team. And of course, because they're aligned on those goals, they focus on those outcomes. The cons are you're probably going to have to hire a bunch of new people or rent some very expensive consultants. They may have some redundant throwaway work. They'll have to integrate into existing teams and also integrate into platforms that may not be ready for you to provide that data. And then there also just may be some internal resistance from the team. So those are two kind of opposite ends of the approach of we're going to embed skills within a current team or we're going to create a new team. And so what we're going to show you here is that example of a fully embedded team. So let's say this is a current product team creating a product, and this could be a software as a service, whether e-commerce or B2B software, where you've got different folks that you just embedded in there, and we could see some different overlap here. But this is a fully embedded product team that would have the PO, the ML engineer, the Scrum Master, the data scientist. And so this is just a team that's focused on ML ops. What I'm going to show here, though, is the idea of expanding this across the company. Okay. So in this case, this is more of a pod structure. You may have seen this in Agile with the Spotify model, but the idea is you still have this centralized AI team. And what they're doing is they're generally making the overall decisions of where we focus next. They set the vision. They provide the standardized tools that other teams can borrow from. Because the team's growing quickly, you probably need to bring in outside folks. So they'll help with the hiring or the evaluating of consulting firms that provide these experts. They're the ones doing the overall governance, which we'll talk about later. And they might provide different tiers of services, which we'll discuss later. So looking at that way, you've got the central team. The dark blue is a FTE hired. You might have an external expert that should not say EA, that should actually say AI, and then an FTE that's embedded within there. So the idea is you have the central team, and they're farmed out to some product teams, and these are pods within your current product. Or you might have a corporate group. This could be your sales team, your marketing team, your customer support team. Those would be the corporate teams on the right. So they would borrow those skill sets as needed. And the idea that the borrowing would occur over time, or they might be fully embedded. And that's how you diffuse this throughout the company. So let me pause there. And I'm going to ask Sharma specifically, are you following this type of approach today? Do you have a central team, or do you have different teams doing different pockets?
We have, I would say, kind of a close to central team.
Okay.
We have some, I mean, I would say, yeah, central team. Maybe we have engineers sprinkled everywhere, but from a data and data scientists and some of this AI, people focused on AI model building and so on, they're in central team.
Okay, very good. So this model, this slide here, you can replace this AI with other skills that are scarce within the company. A common one is user experience. So you could have a same UX team because you don't always have maybe needs for user experience across all the teams. As you get QA automation, this could be the case. As you're starting with DevOps, this is a similar model. So this model starts as you need to add new skills and capabilities within your current product teams or your corporate teams within your company. So don't just assume that this is a model that only applies to AI. Christopher?
Yeah, is this kind of like, is this similar to kind of like how you do like those like team topologies where
Yes.
you're like specialists,
Precisely.
you can do that like kind of reverse comp, what you know what I'm talking about, whatever.
Yep.
Yeah.
Sorry. All right, so okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's a team topology model. Yeah. How do
That's
you
a great
optimize?
question.
Yeah, two things, which are, as we talked about, in one of the earlier sessions, each of these teams, you want to be small, less than 12 people, just do the coordination overhead. You want them to be durable so that they don't go through
And
Tuxman stages. And you want them to
autonomous.
be autonomous so they're not dependent on others. And so
Yep. The
that's why you
ability to
want,
execute everything necessary within the team itself, so they're not dependent or at the minimalization of dependency on other teams to do what they need to do for their business function.
Yeah, Doug and Philip, if I can say something, Madan.
yeah.
So we used to operate as the Spotify model, and that's
Mm-hmm.
how we deployed QA and UX. They have their own managers, but they are
Mm-hmm.
local to the teams that have needs. And we used to have a centralized AI team or a ML team with data scientists and data engineers together. But with the recent spike in Q2, first of Q2, we moved the centralized teams into each team's having their own AI engineer so that they can own their outcome. There's no interdependency, but the vision is set by the AI manager and AI director, but the individual teams own execution.
Good.
Yes, that's actually implied here. Yeah, they're actually dedicated within these teams here, and so the reporting structure of who they report to isn't as important as how they say what they do.
Correct.
They're focused on outcomes for these teams. Is your primary focus? How do I improve the outcomes for each team? And that's assuming you've got teams focused on the right outcomes for the business. But yeah, that's the right approach. You want that. How do you infuse that talent? But ultimately, you want them fully embedded within your product teams. So, all right. So governance, something you're going to have to deal with over time. And then there's different areas, and we're going to walk you through these, and we're going to map this against your maturity models. So there's different areas that you have to focus on. Traditional data management. This is anything time you deal with data, as we talked about with the big data, just the storage, the retention of it, dealing with privacy. This is just the same things you have to deal with that group. So you'll need some policies to understand how long you should keep it and what are the privacy concerns, just the robustness, reliability of it. This is understanding your scalability of the systems. We talked again about privacy and security all the way through the pipelines, any regulatory concerns that you have. So this just may open you up to some new regulations in some cases. Other times it should just fall under what you have. You'll need to set up your ethics, which you may not have had to do before. So this is one thing that may trigger formalizing an ethics officer. The transparency is very important, just understanding the traceability all the way through, which applies to the last one, the interpretability and explainability, which is making sure people can understand how did you come to your conclusions. You need the audit to do that, and just making sure that the algorithm that someone's accountable for bad outcomes to understand what are the worst things that can happen based on the outputs of whatever models you provide, and then upskilling that. So there's a lot of different areas that you need to look at in addition to what you would have normally done just in the big data world. So this
Philip,
is just a
can I
general.
add to
Go
that?
ahead. Yeah.
Go back to the slide previously. These are not new. None of the things you're looking at are new to IT organizations. But when you bring in artificial intelligence, there is a desire to open up the floodgates to some of the things we've previously put in place, put guardrails around. And that's what we're emphasizing here, is that we want to make sure that you hyper aware to all of the guardrails that are right for what you're doing with AI. It has a tendency, or can easily bleed into places that you don't intend for it to go. And that's what we're trying to emphasize here.
So as we said, this is that mapping of as you go through those maturity phases or stages, at what point do you need to put in this governance? Because you don't need to start out immediately. But even at the very beginning, even in the awareness and exploration, you need to start thinking about some of these levels of how well you handle each of these. And as you move further and further to the right, the more that you're going to be having to deal with every one of these things. So you might have some stakeholders perhaps within your privacy group or within the legal department that are concerned about this, this can help you collaborate with those leaders of the company to determine when do you need to improve your governance, because the governance can either slow you down or it can help you up and improve quality depending on how you approach it. So this is a framework to help you work with other stakeholders in the company to determine what level of governance do you need at your stage of maturity. And this is not a hard and fast rule. This is our just general guidance on this as you mature and as you move up in the maturity levels. So we'll leave this as a leave behind for you guys. All right. So now the fun part, which is how do you find these opportunities within the company? And this is generally targeted more towards folks like Eric who are on the awareness stage. So Eric, you get to go through this exercise with us. You always get called out for this. So,
Eric dropped off, Philip. Sorry.
oh, he did?
Yep.
He's gone. All right. So we will, I'll get to play Eric then without him. So the real world, the idea is you have this two different mindsets. One is how much work is there really behind coming up with something new? And a lot of it's just a lot of hard work. That's the idea of Edison on the left side. The right side is if you get the pointy-haired boss, this is, I want ML in the next 12 months. And you'll hear this from stakeholders. Well, we're still hearing this today. This was more common about a year ago when everyone felt like they had a strategy. So we're going to walk you through is how do you strike the balance between these two different stakeholders and understanding how would you communicate a strategy. So in general, the approach we're going to show you, this works for any kind of new emerging technology. This is not just for machine learning, but the next wave of technology that comes, this approach works well. So the way to think about this is, we're going to show a cube. This is not like our cube of three-dimensional space. It's showing just three different aspects, and we're going to put it in a spreadsheet for you to make this easier. But looking inside your company, the first thing I want you to think about is just the general use case, okay? It's how could I solve a particular step in a customer journey for a job to be done for any kind of tool or technology that you have. The second one is analyzing the full process within that job to be done, because anytime you introduce a new technology within an existing process, it's going to have downstream and upstream effects, and it can reorder how you would perhaps change things. And then lastly is if you need to prioritize, and this is only if you're a larger company and you need to pilot in a smaller area there. So this is a way to further refine your opportunities so you don't go after super big things. So let me walk you through this in a little more detail here. So a general use case, in this case, let's say, what technology is good for completing a form? That's a very common thing across all of your functions, whether it's customer facing or whether inside the company. Creating videos. You have multiple departments dealing with videos. Some tools are better for editing or reading a document. Some are really good for moving and transforming data. And then lastly, helping you analyze the data. These are just big buckets of use cases that you're looking for. So looking there, what you'll be looking at here is a specific technology. So from last week, John walked you through all the way from linear regression all the way through GPT, and he elevated each one of those, and each one became increasingly sophisticated and more complex. And the goal here is to identify for the general use case, what are the things to hunt for these different kinds of technologies. And so this is a high, medium, low. High, it's very likely to improve our current state. Medium, it could improve it, but there might be other existing tools. Low, unlikely to be a good use of the tool. And so what you want to avoid is the whole looking at everything as a nail if you only have a hammer. It's looking for the right tool for the job. So it's expanding your tool case. So look at all of the different ML options as a big toolbox, and then look at which tool should be used for specific jobs. So that's the first step, is understanding the tool and just getting familiar with each of those tools. So if you want to revisit last 2 week ago session to cover that. The second step is prioritizing steps within a journey. Okay, so let's say in this case, this is a customer journey, and these are high level journeys here, and these are big buckets. So one is prospect to customer, that's a sales process. Customer onboard to support, that's a major step or process that typically spans multiple teams. An internal one is procure to pay. That's more common in big ones. Inside a dev team, it's from coding to deployment. Those are a lot of multiple steps there. And then Even if you're doing B2B SaaS, if you're moving emerging tenants, moving those around, those are big workflows, things that we talked about in Lean. Those are different ones to look at for hunting. Which of those are higher priority or higher value? So looking at that here, the idea is you probably have to start in a department. One approach is just this top down, which we described here. These are top down approaches here, looking at from the enterprise on down, from the CEO on down. These are big areas of that we know are, we spend a lot of time, there's a lot of risk. Let's go hunt in this area. And you could prioritize those into strategic, like we need this to win in market. Core, we just need to be best in class, or these are just things we need to run the business. Okay. So, and then lastly, if you need to prioritize and refine things within a market, and again, this is only for larger groups here, I'll walk you through these, are looking at, do you want to focus on your core business or your largest business, or do you want to look at a smaller business unit that's emerging where we can experiment a bit more and it's lower risk? So you may want to determine which one of those areas you want to focus on. And again, prioritize those into strategic, we need to win in this market, or core, or infrastructure. So that's the idea, that ultimately you're going to come down to these very small opportunities to focus on. So in this case of the entire solution space, you may find out that a particular tool is really good for editing a document. We're going to do that in the customer onboarding, and we're going to focus on that in our core customer base. So that's the solution set. And this is it conceptually, but looking at it from an overall, like, how would you put this in practice? We're going to send this to you after the session, but it's going to be a high-level spreadsheet. So on the left side, step one, understanding what the tool can do. And this is something you would do either within a small team, or you could bring product owners into this, or even some executives within the business through this. And so to get them familiar with, these are the different levels of tools. So I took these examples from John's session 2 weeks ago. So at a high level, what does it do? What's the model? What are the things it's good for? And what are the things it's bad for? So that you have a good sense of what these tools are good for. For folks that are new to the space, it may take a while to remember what those are. So if you're going to do this as an exercise with the team, you probably want to print this out or have them have 2 screens open so they can see this.
Spend the time, understand the model.
Yeah. And so this will get people thinking, and it'll get them looking for opportunities. So remember how we talked about in big data, we talked about system 1 thinking and system 2 thinking. This is forcing the stakeholders to actively think about, okay, I see this tool, I have a sense of what it can potentially do. This is going to inspire them for some particular things that they know are going to be a quick win, or a quick area, obvious area of hunting grounds. Okay. So that's one exercise. With the same audience, this is an example of applying that just to the sales funnel. This is from prospect all the way down to reselling journey. So, and we'll share the spreadsheet. In fact, I'll probably share it in just a little bit here. But in this one, you're structuring the conversation a bit more and really focusing the team on the biggest opportunity first. So in this case, let's say you want more leads. More leads can be broken into ways that most people do things now today, with organic Google, or if you're buying ads, if you're doing content marketing, perhaps for different areas. If you're buying leads, sorry folks, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can. That wasn't just me then.
No, as my Zoom went out.
I'm
Mine just restarted. So let me get back to that. I'm actually going to go into.
I was jamming on what you were going through. That was intense.
All right, are we back here? Let's
Not
see
yet.
here.
There we go. Back to the spreadsheet. More leads.
Okay.
More conversations.
Yeah.
More
so
conversions.
actually,
Sorry.
yeah. Sorry, folks. Did everybody else get booted out?
I just quit.
No,
I quit.
we've got everybody back. I've allowed everyone again to talk.
All right. My Zoom died. I assumed it was an issue with my client, but it looks like when the presenter.
I was booted too.
You were booted? Okay.
I think it's
We had a sun flare, solar flare.
All right.
Go for it,
Yeah,
man.
no failover. He's right. Yeah. Our recovery time objective was in the past 10 seconds, but we're at 2 minutes now to get us back. That's luck. So I'm actually showing this. I switched from the PowerPoint, which I was showing earlier, to the actual spreadsheet that we cut that from. So going back to the spreadsheet, which we'll give you guys, this is an example of the spreadsheet that you can use with stakeholders. And I created this from an LLM this morning. I just did a little bit of formatting on it. But the idea is that folks can start thinking about immediate ideas. But as you want to start structuring the conversation to say, how can we look for machine learning opportunities, or just in general, this does not have to be machine learning. This can just be making better decisions with data. It could be user analytics. This could just be looking for pain points, but this is structured in a way of looking at the sales funnel, of getting more leads, converting more of those leads, getting bigger purchases, and getting future purchases, and then breaking those down into things that most people are doing today as an example. So just arbitrarily, you could look at these and say, okay, this looks like a good fit. This is a poor fit as an example here, or sorry, I should say poor fit. And if someone does have an idea, you want them to capture it. And so you just have them write down that use case. So this is a very quick way for you to, as a group, come up with a area for hunting opportunities here. Then you could go back through later, prioritize them based on opportunity size and effort. But it's a very quick exercise to get a group together that feels included on how can we go after certain parts of our product or of our company and come up with a strategy. And it's a good way to get folks behind you if you need to come up with it, an overall quick strategy and getting folks up to speed on this. So I'm going to stop this share and reshare back to the PowerPoint here.
There we go.
All right. So any questions on the general approach? And the approach I just described was a workshop approach to get teams to understand how to leverage technology to improve certain parts of the business to improve outcomes. Any questions on that approach? All right. So we very quickly have wrapped up machine learning intro and models. John presented that 2 weeks ago. We quickly went through maturity models, various roles as you pick up a team, whether you embed a team or whether you have a centralized team and borrow resources. And then we talked about governance as you increase in your maturity levels, how to add increasing levels of governance. And then lastly, if you need to go hunt for opportunities, it's more of a product management mindset, product owner mindset. How can we determine what's the best way to apply different tools to different jobs within the company? So in 3 weeks, because of the holidays, we'll shift to the, we'll adjust to the agentic user experience. Our colleague David Blatherwick will be teaching that one. And then transformations is, we'll introduce the ADCAR model, but it's really for you as a leader to persuade others, and we'll teach you some techniques, how to lead the organization through different phases of awareness. And then we'll wrap up with August 8th with our domain-driven design session. So any outstanding questions, and we'll let Christopher stay on too. But any questions from today's session?
A lot of data we've shared. The spreadsheet will be something that I'll include in the email when I send out the update. The video has been produced for you guys. Chris, you have the floor.
Yeah, I always have questions. Sorry, guys.
No,
it's good.
We love it.
Yeah. Can we go to, like, you were going over like the maturity models, Phil?
Yeah.
You had all those things on there. Like, so some of this stuff, like, I don't want to say I struggle with it. You guys do a really good job conveying it, but like, I do like, is going towards a lot of the other participants on here are probably much, much larger organizations than I'm currently at. Like, so I never know like how, I guess, like, is there any advice or tips on like on when I would want to implement something like this? I feel like some of this stuff would be just like such a huge undertaking for me just because I don't have the resources, and like for us to hire, like, say, consultants like to put some of these things in place, or some of the compliance documents, or put together a maturity model would be such a huge undertaking. So I guess like is there like a rule of thumb for, like, say, a small trying to be emergent business to, like, think about some of these things, or when I should really think about going full bore, say, on a maturity model or something like that, or I should be thinking about it right now?
I
The
think
concept
just need to,
still applies.
yeah, I think you would think about it. So one of the lessons I learned at business school was, there were two that would kind of stick with me, but one is, it's about from a legal perspective. Most of this is, where are you going to be sued
Yeah.
or regulated? That's the approach that you would want to look at it from. And then the second part is, once you know where you could be sued, what do you need to be able to sleep at night? So what level do you need to do that? So in general, I would just have the minimum level possible. What's kind of cool now is a lot of the tools available today make a lot of this easier, and they're coming quickly. And so you can do a lot of this automatically without having to go retrofit things in. The more that you can automate things, the more that you can check off the box these items on the left.
Yeah, so I was gonna say too, my next question was, sorry, with the maturity level. So I guess like when you're looking at things that are like high, those are more like these things that have been kind of are meeting more of these like automation type
Yeah.
governance type aspects.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
they're higher priority. You want to have them not manually taken care of. I approach this from a little bit different perspective than Philip. I certainly guide myself towards those things that were where can I be legally compliant or legally liable.
Yeah.
But there's elements you don't need to have a dedicated person to the compliance activity. You embed these thoughts and concepts and perceptions within the people who are doing the work for you as you grow. Eventually, based on scale and size, that may become a distinct role within your organization. But the elements and the importance of what we're doing can be embedded into existing roles, even in small organizations, to make sure that you're safe, to make sure that you're doing the right things, you're being diligent about things that are of a sensitive nature all the way through.
If you focus on auditability first, it kind of covers almost
Correct.
all of the others. The
Yep.
more that you can automate how you audit, that would be the easiest way, so that to check the box on all these.
It's like building security into your software design. If you build security in from the back end, you don't have to worry about it on the front end. It works because you've already built it in. That's the same basic concept that you're looking at here. If you've built in your security on the information you're sharing, managing, and taking care of,
Yeah.
it carries
Yeah.
forward in everything that you do. The adoption, the maturity levels then naturally will contain everything you've got as a concern.
Okay.
Yeah, and we could probably provide more details on each one of these. So
Oh,
the
it's good. I just like I
yeah,
said, like oh, I didn't like I guess a lot of what I do. Well, I mean, everyone's always learning, but I come from a kind of software developer side now, going into the last 10 years trying to be a tech entrepreneur and running all this stuff. So I'm trying to, I guess, learn how to be the best CTO I can be without having like some of these traditional or more of a learning experience from that aspect or a mentor. So trying to just figure it out. So when I see all these materials, I'm kind of like, I mean, I worked in big enterprise for a while when I started out, but it was just a different kind of role I was in. So
yeah. The more that you focus on automation and your team as quickly as possible documenting what they do, the more that you'll be checking the boxes on this stuff. Because that way, if you document how you do things, it's going to make it easier to onboard someone. And that same level of onboarding is going to be needed if you ever get audited at some point. So it's a lot of the best practices around just focusing on how can I streamline what I'm doing today,
yeah,
and whether I automate the pipeline, any dashboards to look at your pipelines, looking at just showing when did I change the model, can I see the model drifting. Any of those dashboards you put in are going to hit a lot of these, just
Yep.
because you're trying to improve the quality of your output. So ideally, you don't have to treat this separately. It should be aligned with improving your outcomes of higher quality output and faster processing and faster onboarding. So, and
gotcha.
that's why I
Build
would
it
look at
in,
all these.
build
Yeah,
it
so
into
I
your
have them
teams.
like always. Well, I'm sorry, Doug.
Build it into your teams. Build
Yeah,
the concepts. You've got a checkpoint all the way through. Build this concept, build this discipline into your teams, and you won't have to worry about it.
gotcha. Yeah, I guess to what you guys are saying, and I guess it's kind of what I've been doing. I guess it just wasn't not as like I guess formal as like what you're showing here, but we've been working a lot this year on I think some of the points you just touched on, like having some of these things in place for when we do want to onboard is a quicker onboarding, but then that audibility, like invisibility aspect of it. Like especially with like as they're designing the protocols for the models, right? I've been having like version control the documents and you know all these other things as well, just to show the I guess the history of how we've changed the protocol in terms of how we're gonna like label the data and stuff for like hitting on some of those things
Yep.
like how are
Yep.
we addressing like bias and fairness or the ethical use aspects of it. So I guess that would hit those buckets.
That's exactly it. And so you might want to just, if in your retrospective, say every 2 months,
Yeah.
maybe every 3 months, just kind of hit this and say, do we need to improve in any of these areas in a
Okay.
retro? And that way you just fold it into a regular cadence.
My conscience would say, be aware of AI because it's new. We, as IT professionals, we have a sense that there's a risk that we could open up gateways to data security that we normally would keep closed because AI is new. Make sure that you are really carefully governing what data is available to AI to make decisions and to drive behavior.
Yeah, I think for the most part, to your point, yeah. I mean, I have some really hard standing rules on some of the things that we'll use for training models. I think one of the areas where I could see it being a struggle is, to your point, Doug, it is people taking company data and plugging it into, say, the ChatGPT interface to get
Yep,
feedback. Right?
precisely.
Yeah,
It,
I'm not kind of like in talking to the CEO, like, you know, where are we gonna, you know, like we're gonna have this something in a spot on how we're gonna like at least address this or think about it because you know, I don't mind the team like using like Copilot and stuff like that, just because I think it helps them a ton with that. But like people putting in like, you know, you can't just upload, say, a protocol and get advice on how to make it better to ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini, just because it's, you know, a proprietary protocol. It's internally designed. So, but then how do you like, I guess, monitor that is another thing that I struggle with, you know, in regards to your point, the data security aspect.
yep. And Dave reminded me that internal tools have a different level
Yeah.
of constancy and attention. But you're absolutely right. The risk is you may have employees or people within your organization who are exposing things that you don't really desire for them to expose. There's different levels of protection you can put around that, but
Or like even using the output incorrectly. So
correct.
we're gonna be,
Yep. And that happened. I can stop recording if you want me to. Hang on a minute.
oh
No,
yeah,
just go ahead. Yeah.